studio at TheInformer, Michael Ray. I know him as the single dad to his daughter Charlie. And Charlie is either 8 or 9, depending if you're looking through a European calendar or an Australian calendar. How old is she, Michael?
We'll go with 8 so that I don't sound quite so old, George.
Okay, so in a month from now, though, she turns 9.
That's it.
Mate, many happy returns getting ahead of the game.
Thanks, George.
In Australia, one of the things we want to talk about, in Australia, 1 in 5 single parent households are dads. 1 in 5. Single father, single mum households are increasing on figures that we've seen lately at 14% and again at 9% respectively. And that's been the rate of growth over the past 5 years. Now, if that rate continues, we're going to see some extraordinary numbers at the other end. And we're almost going to see single mums fade out as a leading part of that sector. And it'll be single dads. Did you ever imagine that you would see a trend like that, 1, develop, and 2, if it continues, that'll be an outcome?
No, George, if we actually look at the whole way society's set up, it's just not a thing. Even the term working mums, 68% of women now work outside of the workforce, outside of the home. So it shouldn't be a thing. Working parents, you never hear the term working dad.
Michael, we've been working with this system for the better part of the last 15, 20 years. It seems to me that so many things we need to catch up on. Our courts need to change not only the way that they behave, also the language that they use, and that appears to be the case too with governments. Because governments, of course, there's this trickle-down effect from what the courts say. The governments, whatever their jurisdiction is, whether it's state or federal, have a series of bureaucrats. Those bureaucrats will go through a bundle of policies, and at the very end of that, we'll see a number of outcomes. And they will use language that was once upon a time on the money, but 10, 20, 30 years on, very much jaded and very much wrong, and is starting to burden communities and families. Am I being unreasonable there?
No, exactly right, George. And the most tangible, visible proof of this is the fact that the latest budget, a huge outcry with a hashtag credible women trending, is that childcare is still seen as a barrier to women's employment, affordable childcare or free childcare, and that's the symptom of the problem. It's not the actual problem. The problem is men aren't held equally responsible for raising the next generation, because it should be a familial or a parenting problem.
Yes.
But with single father households now, with 32% of single father households not in the workforce, only a further 15% currently working part-time, that shows that it's not a women's problem, it's a parenting or a family problem.
But the problem remains that this is a lingering effect. It's a lag, and it's taking an inordinate amount of time to not catch up, but to get anywhere near closer to where it should be. What do we need to do to get government to think differently, to get the courts to not only think differently, but actually start using language that better reflects 2020 and 2021?
George, I'm going to invoke a little bit of one of my heroes,
Ooh.
the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Let's not forget her first sex discrimination case, argued before the Supreme Court, way back in the 70s, was Moritz versus the Internal Revenue Commissioner for the right for a male to be considered an equal carer under the laws, to gain access to a $600 a year rebate, tax break, that was only available to women because they were seen as carers. 1970s here we had the equal pay right, and ironically it was a sausage factory that started it, where women wanted the right to work on the sausage floor, making sausages, but they were paid less. But they were paid less because it was something that they could do during school hours, because it was enabling them still to care for their children. What most of our language and most of our things are doing now, it's still reinforcing that outdated gender expectation that women are able to raise kids. So rather than addressing the problem, beginning at the beginning and starting in the household and enabling and empowering and actually expecting men to be equally responsible, What we've done is we've basically given society aspirin for its toothache. Just enough.
Instead of really addressing
just enough to let it continue.
Challenge.
I can't quite chew on it. I can't quite function. I can't quite contribute to the economy in a way that is meaningful and
but
fulfilling.
That aspirin is causing even bigger problems.
That's it, George. And the further down the road we kick the can, the more it's going to continue. And every time I urge my fellow equality advocates, stop classifying childcare as a women's issue and start classifying it as a parent's issue. You know, Scott Morrison says $180,000 a year isn't a lot of money in his latest budget. Well, guess what he'll pay a father to take 2 weeks out of the workforce to look after his children? $719 before tax. Guess what he'll give to women? 18 weeks. The primary carer. So he's still saying, right, one adult should raise the child and one should work to provide it, because it's not shared. Out of the OECD countries, the average is 10 weeks.
I hear your plea and I hear your lament. But here's the problem. From my perspective, this trickle-down effect that we have, which is how our societies have evolved over the years, it takes an inordinate amount of time to get to here. And it seems to me it's going to take another inordinate, unless something revolutionary happens and we fast forward changes. But we'll have to fast forward councils in the way they think, state governments in the way they think, and federal governments in the way they think. And all the bureaucrats, male and female, on both sides, to start thinking differently and looking at problems with a slightly different lens. Because as far as I'm concerned, they put their glasses on, that's their training, they come straight out of university or wherever, they take up that job, and whatever bias is in there is going to trickle down and be used for the job at hand. So how do we counter that? How do you get them to change what's been... Look, I'm old enough to remember a time when we had households where the mum and dad was the model, and the children were part of that. And then we saw a rise in divorce, and then we saw the introduction of the family law, and we saw an inordinate number of challenges at that time. But it's 2020. We're fast approaching 2021, and I can see some of those outdated and seriously lagged strategies of the 1970s still rearing their ugly head even today. So that's what you have to contend with. So how do we move it? How do we move the bar forward?
George, we're 1/5 of the way through the 21st century.
1/5.
We were meant to have flying cars and all the rest of it, yet we can't take the gender out of parenting. We constantly talk about pregnancy and children as though they only affect women. And it's not
so
just...
why are we stuck? Why are we stuck there?
Outdated gender expectations where we find identity. Men have some part to play in it, women have some part to play in it. There's a thing called maternal gatekeeping, where women have been basically brainwashed into thinking that they're better at it. And that's where a lot of mum guilt and mum shame and that torn between two things, wanting a career and feeling that they need to provide the best parenting for their kids. So dad's not really an option. He's being portrayed in the media as a bumbling fool. So the media has a lot to do with it. Even the marketing. Go to a supermarket and find me a male on any domestic product packaging. Apart from Mr. Sheen and Mr. Muscle, it's women on everything from cake mix through to baby products.
You're so right. When you think about it, when we need any muscle in the kitchen, it's Mr. Muscle or it's Mr. Sheen. If it's to do with finessing or anything else, it's definitely another product, no problem at all. Wow, we have a lot of work to do, don't we?
Remember we had a big outcry a while ago with the brain drain, our best and brightest being lured overseas to work straight from university. The amount of qualified, talented, brilliant women that have simply stepped out of the workforce because of family obligations, because dad hasn't been enabled and empowered to step out of work and work flexibly. A man at the moment is twice as likely to have his request for flexible working rejected. And men are facing the same barriers and challenges to family life
that women were
that
facing
women
years
were
ago.
facing into things. So while the women's equality movement has been great, the approach that got us to this point is no longer effective.
Isn't it
We
amazing?
now need the women to be fighting the right for men, and for every man who's gotten divorced and cries about having to give away part of their superannuation or work 1 million hours to support their weeks, start campaigning for superannuation to be paid as part of maternity leave. Start campaigning for women to be paid equal pay. Then you'll be helped. Not man, not woman, not transgender or non-binary is enough to sustain our march for equality. We need to fight each other's battles and realise that we're all here together. That's what equality is about, George.
I do like the way that we have to fight this battle together. Michael Ray doing this battling each and every time we get him in the studio at The Informer. He's, as I said, a very proud dad of a gorgeous daughter, Charlie, who is fast approaching 9. But we won't mention it again because we don't want to make him feel like he's getting a little older. Michael, great to have you on board, and all the very, very best. It's been a tough time through COVID. How are things your end with the family? You coping with this social distancing and all the other requirements?
Fantastic, George. I'm feeling really fortunate. Charlie's back at school now.
So
Homeschooling. I've nearly mastered grade 3 math. I've gotten a few good notes from the teacher, so we'll take that as a win. But yeah, just so fortunate to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, keep fighting the good fight. We do have to address so many staid and established practices and change of thinking. We do. As you say, we're all in it together, and we should be doing it together. All right? Michael Ray on The Informer.